Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking a really dark, but I think necessary study into one of the 20th century's most chilling figures, Dr. Josef Mengele. Mm-hmm. We all know him by that name, the Angel of Death. But that title, sometimes it kind of obscures the human contradiction at the heart of his story.
Precisely. And our source material today, it really offers a forensic, almost step-by-step trace life. It's fascinating in a grim way.
Yeah.
You know, the Mengele name still has currency in his hometown, Günzburg. There's actually a Karl Mengele Strasse, a main street named after his father.
Wow.
Yet the eldest son of this prominent, really affluent family, he transformed into the symbol of utter malice at Auschwitz. So our mission today really is to give you the shortcut to understanding the precise chronological and ideological catalysts that, that made that transformation possible.
Okay, so we're tracking his path from, an academically ambitious student through his rapid and, frankly, corrosive radicalization, particularly in Frankfurt.
Right.
Then his heinous, 20 months as a doctor at Auschwitz, the killing factory, and then the decades he spent just evading justice, benefiting from sheer luck sometimes, and this extensive network of sympathizers. It starts, though, in a very stable, privileged environment, which is the first paradox we really need to get over.
Indeed. Josef Mengele was born March 16th, 1911, Günzburg, Bavaria. The family business, run by his father, Karl, it was a successful foundry, making crucial farming equipment.
Right.
Even early on, employing 7 men, the family was immediately affluent. They had this robust financial base that would sort of shield Josef from the economic turbulence that defined Germany.
And that prosperity was actually secured during a profoundly chaotic time, didn't it? Which brings us to the backdrop of World War I. So the sources make a strong case that the foundation of Mengele's psyche, or maybe just his privilege, was laid during the instability of World War I and then the Weimar Republic that followed. Germany had only recently unified, 1871.
Right. And
that sudden shift from, 24 states into this cohesive empire, it created a really destabilized European political system.
Yeah.
Led directly to 1940. How did the war specifically impact the Mengele household?
Well, interestingly, it impacted it by making them richer. Karl Mengele, the father, he left to fight, naturally. But the business didn't just tread water. It was aggressively managed by Walburga Hupfauer, mother. She's described in the sources as having this steely determination. And this determination, it really manifested in a crucial commercial success. She negotiated a contract to produce the forage wagon.
The what now?
The forage wagon. It's a type of specialized army vehicle for the German military. Big contract.
Wow. That is a phenomenal piece of insight. Because it means that while much of Germany was being crippled by war debts, inflation.
For inflation, yeah.
The Mengele family actually experienced the war as an economic boon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That wartime success meant that by the early 1920s, even after the devastating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed massive reparations and birthed the highly unstable Weimar Republic, the Mengele family business was thriving.
Right.
It became the 3rd largest producer of threshing machinery in Germany. This huge financial security provided this vital protective bubble around young Joe. It really insulated him from the resentment and the economic despair that fueled so much political radicalism in the generation.
So, okay. He was a privileged kid who became a successful student. What did that success actually look like? Was he brilliant?
He was successful, but maybe not a genius, He had wide-ranging interests, partly excelled at art, enjoyed music, was fond of physical activity, particularly skiing in the nearby Alps.
That's pretty normal, actually.
Yeah. When he passed high school, April 1930, his grades were decent, solid, but unexceptional. His career path initially was quite pragmatic. It sort of reflected the family's business sense.
He considered dentistry first, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing a clear market gap, the town didn't have a local dentist.
Exactly.
But then he pivoted sharply towards the theoretical, the intellectual.
Correct. He shifted to medicine, but specifically focused on anthropology and genetics. And his ambition was significant. He aimed to be the family's first medical scientist.
Okay.
This brought him to Munich in October 1930, and he enrolled in both medicine and philosophy. That dual enrollment, I key.
Why? Why is that combination of medicine and philosophy so significant for understanding? What came later?
Because it meant combining the practical, demonstrable, the hard science of medicine with the broader speculation and inquiry of philosophy. He wasn't just learning anatomy. He was looking for these overarching theories about the human species.
Oh, okay.
And he was doing this just as the Nazis, who were masters of speculative racial philosophy, were really gaining political momentum.
He arrived right as the storm was brewing. The Nazi Party, initially suppressed after that failed 1923 Munich coup.
It's a beer hall putsch, yeah.
Surged back after the 1929 Wall Street crash just collapsed the global economy.
Yeah.
This Great Depression provided the perfect climate for Hitler's mess, the xenophobia, the resentment over Versailles.
Right. And Mengele didn't join the Nazi Party immediately, but he was certainly involved in the periphery of right-wing politics. In March 1931, he joined the Stahlhelms.
The Steel Helmets.
Yeah, the ex-servicemen's organism, known for its sort of paramilitary-style nationalistic rally. He later characterized his own political leanings then as simply national conservative, driven by family tradition.
He saw his political involvement purely in defensive terms, didn't he?
Yeah.
That his motivation was simply preventing the Marxist Bolshevik attack.
Exactly. He viewed the Nazi program as an attractive bulwark against communism, even if he didn't initially commit to party membership himself. But we need to juxtapose this political sort of meandering with his scientific output from the same period. This is where the really profound paradox lies.
You're talking about his 1935 PhD thesis.
Yeah. In 1935, he was awarded his PhD for racial morphological research on the lower jaw section of four racial...
Kitschy title.
Yeah. The hypothesis was anthropological. Could race be determined solely by examining the jaw structure? Now, crucially, historians and scholars who've analyzed this pre-radicalization thesis, they agree on one thing. The findings were based on standard scientific principles and contained no overt racist or anti-Semitic sentiment.
Okay, so at age 24, Mengele was operating as a legitimate, maybe ambitious, but legitimate academic. He was interested in classifying humanity, which was a common, if sometimes flawed, field of anthropology back then.
Right.
But he hadn't yet crossed the line into actual Nazi ideology.
He was a scientist, not yet a zealot. And this period establishes a really vital baseline. The radicalization that followed was not innate. It was an acquired corruption.
Okay, so we have this baseline. A privileged, scientifically engaged student in 1935. But the next few years, it's a dizzying descent. Let's unpack this. What was the mechanism? The specific catalyst that pushed him from what sounds like a neutral academic space to becoming fully immersed in a genocidal ideology within. It's a matter of months, really.
The transition was swift, and it seems driven by two things: career ambition and intellectual mentorship. After his PhD, he had to do this compulsory service as a junior resident doctor to get his full medical.
Right.
He worked in Leipzig, which is where he met your wife, Irene Schoenbein. But apparently he disliked the work, long hours, routine ward round. He just wasn't interested in healing people. He wanted to conduct research.
And that desire for research led him directly to the point of no return. Frankfurt, January 1937.
This is the definitive turn. No question. He secured a research assistant position at the newly established Third Reich Institute for Heredity, Biology, and Race.
Just the name tells you.
Exactly. It's explicitly mandated by the regime. And this meant studying under Professor Ottmar Freier von Verschuer.
Von Verschuer. He was already a big name, wasn't he? A leading intellectual figure in the Nazi project.
Absolutely. Von Verschuer was an open admirer of Hitler, and he was the Third Reich's leading expert on race. Yeah, that insidious concept that the state had a duty to manage the racial and biological purity of the population, often through forced sterilization and, eventually exterminate. The sources state pretty unequivocally that the corruption of his character can surely be traced to the time Mengele spent just absorbing von Verschuer's dogma in this environment.
The pace of radicalization then just accelerates instantly. He didn't just observe the ideology, he institutionalized it in himself.
He did. Steeped in this Nazi racial doctrine, he formally applied and was accepted into the Nazi Party in May 1937. Member number 5,574,907. He'd gone from a national conservative observer to an active registered party member in less. And then he applied for SS membership soon after, later joining the elite Waffen-SS, the ideological fighting wing of the party.
And his work immediately reflected this shift. He was co-authoring court reports for the state, using what the sources call perverse medical evidence to judge Jewish people accused of violating the Nuremberg. Operationally, what did that actually involve? What specific criteria?
It was a shocking application of the pseudoscience he learned from von Verschuer. The Nuremberg laws, they codified racial segregation, restrictions on Jewish people. Mengele and his colleague, they were tasked with enforcing the sort of scientific purity of this legal framework.
How?
It meant performing these grotesque physical examinations, measuring nose, the protrusion of the jaw, ironic, a subject he'd studied legitimately in 35, the length of the skull, other feet, all to determine supposed Jewish ancestry.
So he took the methodology of his legitimate 1935 thesis measurement classification and just twisted it completely, applied it to state-sanctioned persons.
The descent from legitimate anthropological interest to state enforcer of racist ideology is just stark. And his career flourished because of this fanatical commitment. He got his full medical degree in 1938, rapidly promoted by von Verschuer. He was now fully immersed in the powerful elite institutions, the Third Reich, the prestigious Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, which were the academic centers driving the eugenics project. He began openly discussing the eugenic concept of improving individuals and races through appropriate selection.
Chilling. Which brings us to a really dark internal irony just before the war began.
Oh, the ultimate hypocrisy. In the summer of 1939, when he planned to marry Irene Schonbach, a panel from the very regime he was dedicating his life to questioned whether she had traces of Jewish blood. Seriously. They investigated her background. Well-connected colleagues had to intervene, essentially vouching for her purity by assuring the panel she had very Nordic whatever.
The man responsible for determining the racial purity of millions for the state couldn't conclusively prove his own wife or his future children were of pure Aryan blood. The entire mechanism of the regime, the mechanism he was helping build, threatened his own personal life.
Yet this profound contradiction did nothing to temper his zeal. When the war broke out in 1939, Mengele was apparent. He viewed it as a necessary struggle to reassert the German nation after the humiliation of WWII.
So after resolving some initial medical issues he had, he was commissioned as an Untersturmführer, a second lieutenant, in 1940. Where was he first, and what was his role in this emerging empire?
His first assignment was in occupied Poland. He was attached to the genealogical section of the Race and Resettlement Office. This placed him right at the heart of the Lebensraum project, the push for living space. His job was administrative, but fundamentally ideological, assessing the racial purity and suitability of individuals chosen to settle as German colonists, displacing the native non-German population. He was basically enforcing the racial hierarchy on a massive scale on the ground.
He then moved into active combat on the Eastern Front, which often seems a bit incongruous with the academic researcher role he seemed to crave.
He was deployed during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, served in Ukraine, received the Iron Cross second class there. His time on the front actually proved he possessed genuine physical courage, which disturbingly contrasts so sharply with his cold clinical behavior.
You're referring to his actions in 1942 near Rostow at Patay.
Yeah.
While serving with the Waffen-SS's Viking Division, what happened there?
He rescued 2 wounded soldiers who were trapped in a burning tank under heavy enemy, administered first aid, got them to safety. This earned him immediate high military honor: the Iron Cross First Class, the Black Badge for the Wounded, and the Medal for the Care of the German.
So he returned from the front, a highly decorated, courageous veteran.
Exactly. And this fact is crucial because it shows his later violence wasn't born of weakness or cowardice. It was born of profound ideological commitment, coupled with this terrifying clinical detachment.
Okay, this is the operational pivot. And here's where it gets really interesting, or rather, horrifyingly fascinating. Why would a decorated, high-value officer be recalled from the front lines in a war that Germany was clearly beginning to lose? Why was he valued more as a scientist back behind the line than as a medic saving soldiers at the front?
Well, the war was turning against Germany, but the final solution, which had been ratified at the Wannsee Conference in January 42, was accelerating, ramping up.
Right.
Mengele's mentor, von Verschuer, was now the director of the influential Kaiser Wilhelm. They needed research staff. And the concentration camp system provided, essentially, a limitless supply of human subjects for research with absolutely zero consequences or ethical. Mengele was recalled because he was a true believer, a medical doctor, and a decorated
So he wasn't needed to heal. He was needed to facilitate mass murder and exploit the victims for research.
He arrived at the massive Auschwitz complex in May 1940, promoted to Hauptsturmführer. And we have to remember, Auschwitz wasn't a single entity. There was Auschwitz I, the admin center, Auschwitz the Birkenau, the primary extermination camp with the gas chambers, and Auschwitz the Monowitz, the slave labor facility for IG Farben and others.
His first role was as chief physician of the Romani family camp, the so-called gypsy camp. But his main function, the one he's infamous for, was right at the heart of the killing machine. The selection process.
This was the process of deciding who lived and who died, right there on the train ramp upon arrival, and the doctors were the supreme arbiters. Mengele would stand on the gangway as the trains, crammed with Jews, Romani, Soviet POWs, arrive. With just a quick gesture of his hand, left for life, right for death, he determined who was physically fit enough for the brutal labor, or, crucially for him, who was immediately suitable for his personal research.
And the rest.
The rest, often the elderly, the sick, most children, were condemned to the gas chambers within hours, sometimes minutes.
The sources really emphasize his total emotional detachment. This wasn't a duty he grudgingly performed, unlike apparently some other SS doctors.
Mengele was an anomaly. While some other doctors found the selection duties psychologically devastating, Mengele seemed to almost relish the power, the absolute lack of ethical constraint. Witnesses reported him sometimes showing up to perform the selection on
Unbelievable.
He performed his duties and his murders with this professional rigor and total emotion, apparently humming Italian operas while preparing for dissection.
His approach to basic camp health and disease management was equally viciously utilitarian, is how the sources put it.
Absolutely. His goal was never public health. It was preserving the efficiency of the killing factor. We see this clearly in the outbreak of Noma, which is this aggressive, gangrenous process at the Romani camp. A normal doctor, even under those conditions, might try some treatment, however inadequate. Mengele isolated the patients not to cure them, but solely to study the pathology as it progressed.
And the outcome of that study was just premeditated murder for the sake of samples.
Correct. The horror is in the detail. He killed several children who were suffering from Noma, removed their heads and organs, and sent them back to the SS Medical Institute in Graz for detailed study. He viewed the inmates purely as research material, exactly like a chemist might view chemicals in his lab as something utterly dispensable.
And this same ruthless efficiency was applied to preventing outbreaks like typhus or scarlet fever.
Yes. In one absolutely shocking incident, to sterilize a barracks that was infected with typhus just to make space for a new transport of arrivals, he sent the entire populace of the infected block, some 600 Jewish women, directly to the gas chamber.
Liquidation is sanitation.
Exactly. Liquidation was his sanitation method. And in this terrifying bureaucratic reward system for stamping out outbreaks of disease through mass murder like this, he was awarded the War Merit Cross and promoted to senior first physician of Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944.
He wasn't just performing selections and liquidations, though. Auschwitz became his giant laboratory. He had these very specific, macabre interests that he could finally indulge with unlimited subjects and no oversight.
His research obsessions were primarily focused on heredity, really fueled by his training under von Verschoor. He was fascinated by dwarfism, and most famously by heterochromia iridium, people with different colored eyes.
Right.
His methodology was torture. Subjects were injected with various chemical substances. He even attempted to inject chemicals directly into their eyes in a bid to physically change the color of the iris.
And once the observation phase of the research complete, the subjects were almost universally murdered so he could conduct his final analysis.
The cycle was observation, manipulation, and then dissection. Subjects were often killed with lethal injections, sometimes chloroform, sometimes phenol, so their organs could be harvested and studied immediately, and their skeletons. The source materials contained deeply disturbing, including the removal of organs without any anesthesia.
Oh my God.
One specific victim had a kidney removed this way and was then sent back to labor without any painkillers. It just demonstrates an absolute profound indifference to human suffering. It's almost impossible to comprehend.
But the research for which he became most infamous, the twin research, is perhaps the most psychologically complex because of the bizarre preferential treatment they initially received.
The identical twins were his greatest obsession. They represented the perfect natural experiment for studying heredity versus environment. And in a grim survival twist, being identified as a twin could initially spare a child the gas chamber. They were placed in a specific section, received slightly better food, sometimes kept their own hair, wore their own clothes, not the striped uniform. The scale was tremendous. Records indicate at least 175 sets of twins were examined just in the summer of 1944.
What did this specific twin research entail beyond just the surface measurements? It wasn't just calipers and eye charts, was it?
No, God, no. It was this horrific blend of banal, repetitive measurement and deliberate psychological and physical torture. Yes, detailed measurements were taken: skull size, facial features, eye color, eye structure, sometimes up to 2 hours spent simply measuring a pair of eyes. This was done several times a week, tracking the smallest physical variation. But he also deliberately induced pain in one twin to observe the physical and psychological reaction.
Just pure cruelty.
And we have to mention the most perverse experiments that really stand out from the historical record.
Please do. It's important to understand the deaths.
The experiments were often random, horrifying. Beyond injecting unknown substances, he routinely murdered entire sets of twins with chloroform injections so he could perform comparative autopsies immediately afterward while the bodies were fresh. There's the account of him killing Romani twins based only on the false suspicion of TB, just to confirm a diagnosis via autopsy.
And the conjoined twin attempt.
And perhaps most disturbingly, yes, the account of him attempting to stitch two Romani children together back to back in a crude attempt to create artificial conjoined twins. They died horribly days later from gangrene and infection.
The psychological profile that emerges is just staggering. Witnesses say he could bring children candy one minute, then murder them the next, as though it were nothing at all. How do we even begin to reconcile that apparent kindness with the absolute malice?
It's the definition of a clinical psychopath, molded and validated by a murderous idea. He didn't see the twins or any inmates as human beings. He saw them as disposable, perfect search specimens. The kindness was entirely functional. A piece of sugar ensured they didn't cry, made them cooperative, wouldn't interfere with the collection of data.
It wasn't kindness at all.
Not in any human sense.
Yeah.
His obsession with research completely transcended, or rather obliterate, conventional morality. His deep, unwavering indoctrination in Nazi racial hierarchy made the murder of what he considered less evolved race entirely acceptable, even necessary if it served the advancement of his pseudoscience or simply his career ambition.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the collapse of the Third Reich was guaranteed by early 1945, but Mengele's remarkable streak of bureaucratic luck, combined with the really extensive efforts of the Rat-Line network, allowed him to evade any form of justice for the rest of his natural life. It's astounding, really. The Soviets liberated Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, but Mengele fled the camp about 10 days prior, taking his most crucial samples and notes with him, although he apparently left the bulk of his administrative records behind in the chaos. He spent 3 months just moving westward, blending into the chaos of the retreating German army, until he learned of the Third Reich's unconditional surrender in May 1945.
And here is the truly critical error in the immediate post-war period, the moment that absolutely secured his long-term. In mid-June 1945, Mengele was actually apprehended by an American division. He was interviewed, and he gave the interviewers Yosinko.
Wait, he was a high-profile, wanted war criminal, listed as such. He identified himself correctly, and they still released him. How could such an egregious oversight possibly happen?
It comes down to one tiny bureaucratic detail that saved his. He was released in September 1945 because he did not possess the mandatory SS blood group tattoo.
The tattoo under the armpit.
Exactly. Back in 1938, he had apparently refused this tattoo, maybe believing it was unnecessary or perhaps undignified for an officer in dock. Whatever the reason, when the Americans were processing the millions of captured German personnel, they relied heavily on this physical identifier for SS members.
So no tattoo, no SS affiliation in there.
Essentially, yes. Since Mengele lacked the tattoo, he was processed merely as a non-commissioned Wehrmacht soldier, likely a medic, and he was simply released back into the shattered landscape of post-war. A single refusal years earlier saved him from immediate capture and almost certain trial and execution.
That one act of mild defiance, or maybe vanity, against SS protocol shielded him from the entire Allied just being set up. Amazing. After his release, he went underground immediately.
He used aliases Fritz Ullmann, then Fritz Holman, found work as a simple farmhand for the Fischer family in the Alps foothill. He remained sheltered in this rural environment for 4 years. The sources indicate his state of mind was deeply
delusional hell.
He apparently called the Allies the Crusaders, and bizarrely claimed he intended to turn himself in eventually for a fair trial, genuinely believing that he had actually improved the situation at Auschwitz through his medical. He was convinced his actions were scientifically justified.
That underscores the complete lack of conscience. So in 1949, his luck shifted from just bureaucratic accident to organized criminal aid. How did the Rat-Line facilitate his move to South America?
The Rat-Line was this sophisticated, highly organized network. It involved elements within the Catholic clergy, former Nazis, fascist sympathizers, often operating through routes via Italy, dedicated to smuggling Nazis out of Europe to avoid justice. Assisted by this network, Mengele crossed into Italy, ended up in Genoa.
Right.
There, using stolen or falsified documentation, he duplicitously acquired a Red Cross passport under the assumed name Helmut Gregor, and with that, he sailed for South America.
And Argentina, specifically under President Juan Perón at the time, provided a deliberate safe haven, didn't it?
Perón's regime was actively welcoming former Nazis. They saw it partly as an act of political defiance against the growing power of the United States after the war. Argentina provided a perfect, politically aligned sanctuary where money could be easily laundered from Europe and identities could be hidden or changed.
So in Buenos Aires, from 1949 to roughly 1960, how did he manage to survive and even thrive? Did he continue his medical practice?
He worked initially as a traveling sales, selling farm equipment, often leveraging his family's existing business connect, and, crucially, the money which continued to be channeled to him from the family business in Germany.
The family was still supporting him.
Oh, yes. He used these funds to buy a stake in a carpenter. Critically, sources strongly suggest he engaged in probable illegal medical practice, including involvement in illegal. So yes, he was continuing to practice medicine, often dangerously and completely outside the law.
And despite being an international fugitive, hunted by Nazi hunters, his life achieved this semblance of stability, even normality.
A horrifying stability. He divorced Irene back in Germany in 1954, and then in 1958, he married his widowed sister-in-law, Martha, who actually came out to join him.
Wow.
The laxity of the local authorities, perhaps combined with bribes, was such that he was able to briefly return to Europe in the mid-1950s using his false papers, and incredibly started living openly under his real name again in Argentina. He felt entirely untouched.
What finally shattered that sense of security and forced him back into deeper hiding?
The legal net started tightening slightly in 1958. He was briefly questioned, along with other doctors, regarding the death of a young woman during an illegal abortion, though he was ultimately uncharged. This clearly spooked him.
Made him cautious again.
Exactly. He began moving again, shifting between Paraguay, which granted him citizenship under his false name, and Bolivia. But the ultimate close call, the one that really sent him underground, arrived in 1960.
That was the year Mossad captured Adolf Eichmann in Buenos Aires.
Yes. Mengele was a major target for Nazi hunters, especially Simon Wiesenthal, and also for Mossad. Eichmann's abduction in May 1960 sent shockwaves through the Nazi expat. Mengele avoided capture only because he happened to be in Bolivia at that exact time. Eichmann was later tried and executed in Israel, but Mengele slipped away again, protected by his network and his contacts.
He then relocated permanently to Brazil, once again relying on the deep connections of sympathizers there.
He often resided on a remote farm near Sao Paulo, belonging to a prominent Nazi sympathizer family, the Stammers, and later closely associated with another sympathizer named Wolfgang Gerhard. Mengele would eventually adopt Gerhard's identity after Gerhard returned to Europe. Despite being relentlessly pursued, on paper, he remained safe due to the commitment of this enduring network of aid and his own parents.
He lived out his life there, dying on February 7, 1979, near age 7. Not exactly a dramatic end.
No. He died due to a second stroke while swimming at the seaside town of Bertioga, Brazil. The official cause of death was drowning, resulting from the stroke. He was, tragically, one of the longest-lived, most notorious war criminals of the Holocaust to completely escape justice.
But the record showed, right up until his death, he remained utterly, completely unrepentant.
That is the ultimate tragedy of his successful flight from justice. 2 years before his death, in 1977, his son Rolf visited him in Brazil. Rolf later recorded, and this is chilling, that his father showed absolutely no remorse whatsoever for his actions at Auschwitz.
Not at all.
None. Mengele affirmed that his crimes were simply part of his duties as an SS officer performing necessary scientific research. Rolf concluded unequivocally that his father was simply an unrepentant Nazi.
His death remained a secret to the world and to Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal until 1985, when correspondence was finally discovered in his hometown of Günzburg, linking Wolfgang Gerhard to the Mengele family.
The world needed proof. His body was exhumed from the Embu das Artes cemetery near Sao Paulo, where he was buried under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. International forensic experts examined the...
and confirmed it was him.
Yes, the forensic evidence, dental records, skeletal analysis definitively confirmed the remains. And here we come to the final, profound, almost unbelievable irony of his entire...
The skeleton. The skeleton of the man who obsessed over racial purity, who murdered thousands to collect organs and measure skulls, is now an educational tool.
The medical school at the University of Sao Paulo took possession of the skeleton. Today, the skeleton of the man who used human beings as disposable laboratory materials is used as an educational aid for modern medical, teaching them anatomy and forensic science. It was never reburied. The man who sought to classify and destroy specific human groups based on physical features now serves as an anonymous teaching tool for the very science he so #outro.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean? We've traced a life marked by just stunning speed in its descent into evil. He was, by all accounts, a promising, maybe even unproblematic, non-racist academic operating within a legitimate scientific framework in 1935.
Right.
Yet within 3 short years, by 1938, he was a fanatical member of the Waffen-SS, fully dedicated to implementing pseudoscientific racial hygiene. The sheer speed of that transition, well, it's terrifying.
And his physical presence at Auschwitz, spanning just 20 months, saw him personally order the deaths of tens of thousands at the ramp and commit murder for research on hundreds more. The brutality was absolute, from the liquidation of entire barracks just for sanitation to the stitching of 2 children together in that grotesque attempt to create conjoined twins all in the name of his twisted eugenics.
And we absolutely have to emphasize the role of sheer luck and that network of aid that allowed him to evade global justice for 34 years. He escaped capture primarily due to that single factor, not having the SS tattoo when detained in 1945, and then the decades-long systematic protection provided by the Rat Line and its sympathizers, the Stammers, Wolfgang Gerhard, the political climate of Perron's Argentina.
Combination of facts.
Which forces us, I think, to consider a really fundamental question. His initial scientific work, back in 1935, was deemed unproblematic even by modern standards. Given his incredibly rapid and extreme radicalization after 1937, what does Josef Mengele's story teach us about the immediate corrosive power of institutionalized ideology on the human capacity for morality?
Yeah, it makes you wonder how quickly abstract scientific curiosity or even just career ambition can curdle into systematic, unimaginable cruelty when it's sanctioned, even demanded by state power and a pervasive ideology.
Something for you, the listener, to really mull over long after this deep dive is complete. Thank you for joining.